we're seeing a wave of resignations.
4.4 million American workers quitting in September.
This is me, 15 minutes after quitting my corporate job.
My name's Andrew. I'm an ICU nurse, and I just quit my job in the hospital.
I decided pay was important, and if I ever wanted to make more money, I had to get into a different career.
Over 47 million Americans quit their jobs in 2021, more than in any other year on record. And as resignation rates remain high in early 2022, we're left to ask, is this a temporary spike due to the pandemic, or is this a greater shift in the way we view work?
The term, the Great Resignation, the story behind it originates in late 2020. A reporter reached out to me who was writing a story on what's the best way to quit your job. When we finished talking about it, I said this will be an important article to write because I think there's going to be a wave of resignations or a great resignation as this country emerges from the pandemic.
The pandemic radically changed how Americans work. Homes turned into offices, and frontline workers were forced to risk their health for a paycheck. But in terms of quitting, the 2021 rates were actually in line with a trend that's been growing for a decade before plummeting during the pandemic. If you couple that with a rapid economic rebound, how much of the Great Resignation is an outcome of economic trends versus a fundamental change in how we work?
On the one hand, it's very high. On the other hand, I don't think it's remotely surprising given the circumstances. The federal government spent trillions of dollars. That has generated the most incredible recovery from the pandemic.
This is a massive, ambitious plan, nearly $2 trillion in relief.
The Great Resignation is an outcome of booming business, and the economy is doing well, and firms have to fight hard to keep employees.
I think that working from home was a Kickstarter for the Great Resignation. If you're leaving a job previously, that means uprooting. But now you toss one laptop to the side and then bring in a new one and you're logging into a new portal. So that barrier to entry for transitioning to jobs has changed.
But why and how people work is complex. In late 2020, Professor Klotz saw the Great Resignation coming when he noticed 4 signals that Americans were ready to quit. The first was a backlog of resignations. During the pandemic, most Americans paused any plans to leave their job.
Once the threat of the pandemic started to lift, it made sense to me that many of these individuals would enact their plans to quit their jobs.
The second was widespread burnout. The pandemic left Americans in every industry exhausted.
In many cases, the cure for burnout is getting away from that which causes the burnout.
The third signal was the effect of people reevaluating what work meant to them.
The quote I kept hearing was that going into the pandemic, I rearranged my whole life to fit my work. Coming out of the pandemic, I want work to fit around my life. And in many cases, those would involve a job change or a career change.
The final signal was remote work. Before the pandemic, only 15% of people worked from home. And since then, 50% of jobs have some work from home component.
And it seemed like there was a big disconnect there between what employees, what workers wanted, and what organizational leaders were hoping would happen coming out of the pandemic.
The Great Resignation impacted almost all areas of work, but the effects have been felt most among frontline workers, those who continued to work in person during the pandemic, keeping grocery stores, restaurants, and hospitals running.
It's really interesting for the individuals who have in-person work that are not able to switch to remote work. I think those individuals felt especially unfairly treated by the pandemic because not only did they have to work in person, but they also saw another half of the population who were working remotely.
This is what democracy looks like!
Frontline workers have faced the realities of the pandemic head-on while providing the country with the essential resources to make it through this. Overall, those jobs pay less than the jobs from home, but the labor market has shifted. Unemployment is low, and frontline workers have more say in where they work.
From 1980 to 2019, so the last 40 years, we've seen a continual increase in pay rates of high earners, graduates, professionals, but low earners have been flat. For the first time maybe in decades, you can say, look, I can quit my job, easily find another job and get a pay increase at the same time. And in fact, that's why they're quitting. People aren't quitting mainly because, they're dissatisfied with their current jobs. They're generally quitting to get another job.
The Great Resignation isn't simply about people quitting. It's a shift in how they live. Working from home was supposed to be a short-term precaution, but months turned into years, and people adapted to a new way of life.
Something that's really been interesting over the past couple of years throughout the pandemic, we've seen remote work go from the margins into the mainstream. And the data on LinkedIn is showing us that 1 in 7 jobs that are being posted right now have a remote or hybrid work component.
In March of 2020, that number was 1 in 67.
Over the 2 years of the pandemic, working from home has gone from being a necessity, provide social distancing, to something now that's seen as a permanent feature of the labor market and is essential to retain and hire workers. Nobody I talked to is thinking of going back. I mean, I'm not aware of anyone successfully got professionals back 5 days a week. I don't think it will happen.
53% of folks that we've surveyed saying that now they are putting more focus, more emphasis on their own mental health and well-being. Remote work allows them to do that because it gives that flexibility. So organizations and leaders need to be very intentional about how they're building this new future of work.
A lot of these assumptions that we had before the pandemic, we were forced to go to remote work, and a lot of those assumptions were tested, and in many cases they didn't hold up to scrutiny.
Most folks are always going to be resistant to change, but again, there's been so much productive work that's come out of the past 2 years. I think that's really put that to rest.
We're in a bit of a golden age of business experimentation. The exciting thing is that the 9-to-5 work week is not going to be replaced by some other single type of work arrangement. What it's being replaced by is an almost infinite number of work arrangements.
The pandemic opened the door for a massive shift in how people work, and how companies handle the return will have lasting impacts on who stays in the workplace.
So I'm regularly cautioning companies to avoid making decisions just amongst senior execs. So we see quite large variations in how much people want to work from home by age, by gender, whether they have kids, by race, by commute time, by disability status.
One reason that I believe the Great Resignation, or that article around the Great Resignation back in May of 2021 went viral, is because it was tapping into a conversation that was happening just below the surface. And it gives us this opportunity to really question the fundamental way that we were working with employees in 2019 and say, how do we fix this to hopefully lower these turnover rates back down to where they were maybe 10 years ago or so?